RJ Davis dropped 42 points, but North Carolina once again struggled to put an ACC team away. Is this cause for concern on Chapel Hill?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part, of course, of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more right now. New customers who join today, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more is a win. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Folks, solo host today, Andy Patton. My co-host, Isaac Shade, was in Chapel Hill, sitting right around Roy Williams, watching the North Carolina Tar Heels pull off a victory over Jim Laranaga's Miami Hurricanes on Monday. Big Monday action in Chapel Hill. So it's just me today getting you a recap of that game, talking about what it means for Carolina, talking about what it means for Miami. We'll also talk about Baylor's big win on the road against TCU, an insane comeback by West Virginia, nearly pulling off what would have been an upset over Kansas State. We'll close out the show with some previews of some of the action coming your way tonight on Tuesday here in college basketball. But we're going to start with the game, the ACC game, the first game in Big Monday. It feels like the last couple of weeks when we've done these Big Monday recap episodes, we're always starting with the Big 12 game. The second game always seems to be the more interesting one, and that's not too shocking considering the depth of talent in the Big 12 compared to the ACC. There haven't been as many high-profile matchups to line up in the ACC, but we were delivered a pretty good one here on Monday evening. North Carolina ends up winning this one 75-71. There's two big stories in this game. Story number one was RJ Davis. RJ Davis hit a three right out of the chutes, was immediately good in this game. I think he had 16 at halftime. We didn't quite feel like, okay, he's going to set a record here, but he was playing really well. He was certainly trying to avenge the struggle that he had against Virginia in North Carolina's most recent game. Obviously, lots of guys struggle, particularly offensively when they're playing Virginia, but Davis came out and just continued to dominate in this game, ended up finishing with 42 points. That is a record at the Dean E. Smith Center in Chapel Hill. Most points ever scored there. This was a record-setting, incredible performance from RJ Davis. He has looked pretty consistently like the ACC Player of the Year throughout the season. North Carolina has remained in first place. They now have a 1.5 game lead on Duke before Duke's game against Louisville on Wednesday, where they will likely get at least a game of that back. Regardless, North Carolina has been the best team in the ACC. RJ Davis has quite clearly been the best player in the ACC, looking to average 20 points per game, be the first North Carolina point guard to do that in a very long time if he is able to secure that. So tremendous stuff from him, and he looked every bit the part in this game. But the other part of this game was that North Carolina once again struggled to put a team away. And this is not the first time we've seen this. They struggled to put away Florida State. They struggled to put away Duke. Granted, Duke is a top 10 team, so you don't feel too bad about that. Only a 10-point win at Boston College. Yeah, Boston College is good. It's a road game, but you'd like to see North Carolina be able to keep the gas going, like keep their foot on the gas. Stay like they kind of just let teams get back into games too often. In this one, they ended up having a 13-point lead at the under 4 media timeout. And it was 3:45 left in the game. Miami goes on an 11-0 run, and this game's within 2 with 5 seconds to go. Carolina was able to get clutch rebounds, and when they needed to, Seth Trimble got a really big rebound off a missed free throw, and they ended up finally being able to put it away. But what we saw in that final 4 minutes from Carolina was inability to break Miami's press, which shout out to Miami. They were down Wooga Poplar and Nigel Pack. They came out, they fought really hard. You expect that from a Jim Laranaga coach team, a team that has not been good this year. They're now 6-12 in the ACC, down 2 starters. They could have wilted. They could have folded down 13 with 3.5 minutes left, but they put the press on. They flustered North Carolina into, I think, back-to-back turnovers, maybe even 3 consecutive turnovers. And then Carolina just could not get it done at the free throw line. They shot 57% from the free throw line in this game, just really struggled to do the things that you need to do to win a basketball game at the end. And if they didn't have a 13-point cushion with 4 minutes left, there's a chance that we're talking about RJ Davis's incredible jaw-dropping, career record-breaking performance in a loss. It almost got to that point for North Carolina in this one. And that is a concern for this team going forward. They need to be able to put teams away. North Carolina's on the cusp of potentially being a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Now, they have some work to do to get there. 3 of the 4 spots feel pretty well locked up between UConn, Purdue, and Houston. That 4th spot right now is up for grabs as Arizona has struggled lately. North Carolina, I think, is right in that conversation, along with Tennessee, potentially Duke if they end up winning the ACC and taking it from the Tar Heels. So North Carolina has a chance to do something really special and get that 1 seed and potentially make a deep run and kind of avenge last year's disaster of being the number 1 overall ranked team in the preseason and not even making the NCAA tournament. But for North Carolina, they have to find a way to keep their foot on the gas, to not let up in these games, to knock down free throws down the stretch. I mean, this game was at home. You kind of expect, all right, maybe the home team's going to come back if we're on the road and we have a 10-point lead. It might disappear. The crowd's going to get into it. They were at home celebrating a player having a phenomenal night. Roy Williams in the house. Larry Brown's in the house. Everybody's in the house. And yet they stumbled down the stretch. Like this is an issue for North Carolina. Maybe it's a depth thing. The depth is good, but they've got a lot of young players coming off the bench. Perhaps that's the case here. I think, again, a lot of it is just credit to Miami for fighting as hard as they did. They have some experience, and this team in this game in particular wasn't very deep just because they were missing 2 of their key starters, but they fought really hard in this one. And I think they deserve some praise, but I will be remiss if I wasn't at least somewhat weary of Carolina's ability to win 5 games in the NCAA tournament when they get leads and they don't necessarily, they don't do a good enough job of not letting those teams get back into those games. For Miami, another unfortunate result in a season that just hasn't led to much fruitfulness for them. I mean, coming off of back-to-back Elite 8 appearances, coming off of being in the Final Four last year. This year's team, we knew they lost significant pieces, no Isaiah Wong, no Jordan Miller, but man, it has been really rough. And injuries have played a huge part. Like, it's not just now that they've been dealing with these injuries. Poplar's missed time already this season. Nigel Pack has missed. I think this was his 3rd game in a row that he's missed. Those are 2 incredibly key players to not have healthy. Norchad O'Meara had a great game. He was a huge reason that Miami was able to stay in this one. Keyshawn George looked fantastic as well. This is a very talented team. Bensley Joseph had a good game. But I feel for Coach L because I think injuries have played a big part in this team just not being able to jive and really kind of find their footing early in the year. But to go off of being a Final Four team to being 6-12 in a down ACC is a really sharp decline. And I don't think that it's going to last. Miami's probably going to find their way out of this next season. They'll add some key pieces in the portal. They seem to be really good at that. They'll get some development from some of the younger guys, depending who stays and who potentially leaves for the NBA. Like, I don't think that there's long-term concern for Miami. Obviously, there's concern about how much longer is Coach L going to be the head man just because of his age. But this has been a tough season, and this was an opportunity to kind of really pick up a lot of those frustrations and turn them into a monster W on the road. And they came this close, but just weren't quite able to get it done. Meanwhile, Baylor, they nipped a 2-game losing streak in the bud with a huge road victory over TCU. And they look like the team, honestly, that's capable of going on a pretty deep run. We're going to talk about that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers who join today get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket if your team wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA teams and players with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And on the college basketball side, Kansas just 6.5-point favorites at home against BYU tonight. Look, that is a tight line, especially at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. I trust the Jayhawks in that one. If you do too, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, folks, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, still your solo host, Andy Patton, today, and we're still going through a recap of Big Monday. We talked about Carolina's win over Miami and the ACC to kick off Big Monday. We also had 2 Big 12 games. Technically, the Big Monday game on ESPN was Baylor and TCU. We'll start with that. But also on ESPN2 going on at the same time as that Miami-Carolina game was Kansas State and West Virginia, which turned out to be a far more exciting game than I think most would have expected it to be. We'll get to that. But we'll start in Fort Worth with Baylor going on the road to beat TCU. 62-54 was the final score there. And that score feels closer than the game. It was a very interesting game. Basically, Baylor, and they were tied throughout most of the first half. I think Baylor had a 1-point lead at halftime. Then Baylor went on a huge run, built up a massive lead. I think they went on a 18-2 run, got a big lead in the second half. And then TCU just kind of kept chipping away towards the end of the game, managed to fight their way back into it, ultimately made the score look closer than it really felt. But this was a big win for Baylor. For starters, they had a 2-game losing streak coming into this game. They lost at BYU. They lost at Houston. No shame in either of those losses. There are very few bad losses that you can take in the Big 12, but this was a team that was at the top. They were fighting with Houston. They were fighting with Iowa State to be at the very top of the standings in the Big 12. Losing those 2 games really hurt them in terms of their ability to gain ground. Now they're back up. They're 9-6 in conference play. That puts them a half game behind Kansas, who, of course, has got an opportunity against BYU tonight. It puts them 1.5 games behind Iowa State, and it puts them 2.5 off of Houston. So they are in sole possession of 4th place in the Big 12 right now. That doesn't feel like exactly where Scott Drew and the Bears wanted to be, but it's also not a terrible spot to be. And they got some nice momentum coming off of this win on the road against a good TCU team that was 30th in the net coming into this game. And part of the reason that Baylor was able to pick this one up was because of their tenacious defense and rebounding, which is frankly not something we say about Baylor all that often. That is not kind of typically what they are known for. Physicality, sure, but defense overall has never been a huge strength. Typically, you'll see them on Ken Palm's adjusted offensive efficiency as a top 10, top 5, top 3 team. Defensively, not so much. And rebounding has been an area of concern for them this year. Part of the reason that they were able to rebound so well in this game and have been better at it as of late is the development and growth of Yves Missy, who is just an incredible talent. The fact that he has only been playing basketball for a few short years, like his potential to me feels through the roof. I'm not a draft expert. We will speak to draft experts on the podcast. We will have our friend and regular guest Leaf Tulane on the podcast between the end of the season in June when the draft season is really kind of in full steam. But to me, the upside with somebody like Yves Missy just feels sky high. He's so athletic. He's so talented. He's so physical. He's got nice touch around the rim. Obviously, there are elements of his game that need to grow. But for what he has picked up and the time that he has played basketball, I have been extremely impressed with him. He had a great game here. Ray J. Dennis had 9 rebounds. He also had 9 assists. He also had 9 points. That is an unusual stat line that you're not going to see very often. It was this close to a triple-double without getting anywhere actually all that close to a triple-double in some ways. But the Bears out-rebounded TCU 41-29 in this one. Jalen Bridges also had 8 rebounds. He also had 4 threes. 3 of them were the first 3 buckets made by Baylor. Baylor was briefly up 9-8 because Jalen Bridges had made 3 3-pointers. It was a really nice game from him, particularly in the first half. Jacoby Walter dominated in the second half. 13 of his 16 points came in that frame. But what really stood out was, again, the 13 rebound advantage for Baylor over TCU, as well as the fact that TCU was held to 54 points. This is one of the best fast break teams in the entire country. They got held to 54 points at home. They only shot 33% from the field, and they turned it over 14 times. That is a really, really good defensive performance from Scott Drew's team. And the question is, if they can do this, if they can put the clamps on good offensive teams like TCU, do they have a chance? Are we not giving Baylor enough credit? Is this a team that could be a Final or an Elite 8 team? Final 4, maybe. Sweet 16 at least. Like, is this a team that can compete in that kind of conversation? They're going to need to show that the defensive improvements can stick. As we're recording this right now, it is late Monday evening. Ken Palm has not adjusted after this game, but they were coming into this game 85th in the country in adjusted defensive efficiency. As a reminder, no team has won the national championship in the Ken Pom era with an adjusted defensive efficiency worse than 22. Now, we're not talking about Baylor as a national champion right now. And also, when you win 5, 6 straight games in the NCAA tournament, your adjusted defensive efficiency continues to improve. Teams did not come into the NCAA tournament already at 22. You make improvements, but Baylor's very far away from that, which is to say they are not a good enough defensive team right now, according to the metrics, to be a national champion. But they played like a great defensive team on Monday night. Can they continue to do that? That is going to be the big question. The question on the other side for TCU is how much wiggle room do they have in terms of being an NCAA tournament team? Because this loss bumped them down to 8-7 in the Big 12. If you have a winning record in the Big 12, I feel like you're in a pretty good spot because of how difficult that conference is. They are 19-9 overall, which is obviously fantastic. Again, 30th in the net as we're recording right now. Will probably come down a little bit because of a home loss to Baylor, but it's probably not going to impact them that much. Baylor's pretty darn good. I think they're 16th in the net coming into the game. But it'll be interesting to see how the committee starts to treat TCU if they fall below 500 in the Big 12. What does that look like for them? Now, the good news, if you're a TCU fan, if you're starting to get worried about this, they have I guess it's good news. They have a unique end of the schedule in the Big 12. They close with these 3 games: at BYU, at West Virginia, home against Central Florida. Most would look at that, see 3 teams that are behind them in the standings, not see Houston, not see Kansas, not see Iowa State, and think that's a pretty good schedule. But here's the deal. Winning at BYU is hard. It is hard to win in Provo. The mountains make it a more difficult environment for the players. It is a raucous house. That is one of the most difficult places to play college basketball in the country. And a loss on the road to BYU, while not a terrible loss in a vacuum, is just not something TCU can take. A home loss to Baylor followed by a road loss at BYU is really, really tough for this Horned Frogs team. And then you got to go to Morgantown, where West Virginia just dropped 53 points in the second half and nearly pulled off what would have been a shocking upset over Kansas State, who had a 22-point halftime lead. West Virginia is not very good, but they are good at home, and they are definitely talented enough to beat this TCU team. So if you're TCU and you lose on the road at BYU, you lose on the road at West Virginia, or you win, even if you split that series, now with this loss to Baylor, you have to win against Central Florida, which they should do. They should take care of that game. But this 3-game closing schedule looks not too bad, but every one of them is a tough game, and it's in and of itself, and they don't have a lot of wiggle room. You go 1-2 in these final games, you probably need to win a game or 2 in the Big 12 tournament, or else all of a sudden you go from we're pretty comfortable. We're one game over 500, 1.5 games over 500 in the Big 12, 30th in the net. We're going to be fine to now we're sweating. We're not feeling so good. We're hoping now maybe we can still get in as a 9 seed or a 10 seed, or maybe we'll get a play-in game, that kind of situation. Like, life comes at you fast. And that could be the reality for TCU at this point. This would have been a huge game to get, but they wilted early in the second half, made it a little closer. But not getting this game means they got to go either win in Provo, which is difficult, in Morgantown, which is difficult, and of course at home against Central Florida. But they probably need one of those 2 road games, at least to feel a lot more comfortable getting out of the regular season and into the Big 12 tournament. I mentioned it briefly. I'll mention it again. West Virginia was down 22 at half. 48-26 was the score. West Virginia was only shooting 33% from the field. They were just 2 of 12 from 3. Meanwhile, Kansas State had hit 11 first-half threes. It looked like that thing was long over. Jerome Tang and the Wildcats going to walk away with the victory. Instead, they still did, but West Virginia dropped 53 points in the second half. Raekwon Battle. Khalif Battle had a really good game for Arkansas last week, but Raekwon Battle here, 28 points, 6 of 9 from 3 for him. Just lit it up in that second half. Kirk Reese had 25 and 6. sent this thing into overtime. Kansas State still managed to recover from that bad second half, won this one by 4. Tyler Perry, 29.6 assists, 6 of 11 from 3. Neither of these teams are in the NCAA tournament picture. It doesn't really change anything all that much. Kansas State moves up to 16-11 overall, 6-8 in conference play. But it was a wild, wild game that did not have any business being as insane as it was. Just goes to show you never know what you're going to see in the Big 12 night in or night out. Well, Kentucky, they're heading on the road tonight to take on Mississippi State. Can they carry some momentum from that monster win against Alabama? We're going to talk about that and preview some other games going on Tuesday night. Coming up after a word from today's sponsor, GameTime. We are just 2 weeks away from the Power Conference college basketball tournaments. And if you don't have tickets, but your team is making a wild run, GameTime is the perfect place to get those last-minute tickets so you don't miss out on all of the excitement. GameTime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, GameTime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And they have this really fun feature with GameTime Zone Deals. What that means is you pick the section, GameTime picks the seats, and you can get big time savings. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime, where you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So download the GameTime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. Again, that's $20 off your first purchase at GameTime with code LOCKEDON. Terms apply. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, closing out today's show, getting you ready for the Tuesday night's action. Lots of great games going on in college basketball. Broke them up into a couple different categories. We got our ranked on the road games. We got 4 ranked teams playing at home on Tuesday night, and then we got a couple other bubbly games, other contests that are worth mentioning here. We'll start with the 2 ranked on the road teams. This has been the storyline all season long. For those of you who are everyday listeners, you've heard Isaac and I talk about this pretty much every episode for the last few months. Ranked teams are struggling on the road when they go play unranked opponents. Their success rate is barely above 50% this year. It's been a really wild thing. It has led to more court stormings, which has been another big storyline. Kyle Filipowski, as I'm recording this right now, appears to be okay. Sounds like he's going to be good to go against Louisville on Wednesday. If he's not, it's likely just precautionary because, well, they're playing Louisville, so they don't need him all that much. But that has been a big storyline because of how many of these ranked teams have gone on the road and lost. 2 of those matchups coming up tonight. Number 16, Kentucky Wildcats, John Calipari's team, going to take on Mississippi State Bulldogs. That game is at 7 Eastern time on ESPN. Mississippi State favored by 3.5 points at FanDuel. We also got Utah State, 22nd ranked team in the country, at Fresno State, 10 Eastern time. That game will be on the Mountain West Network. FanDuel favors the Aggies of Utah State by 11.5 in that one. And yeah, there's a real opportunity for an upset here. And it's not Fresno State. Fresno State did in their most recent game, played San Diego State and got crushed. I think they only scored 41 points. This Fresno State team is not particularly good. Utah State, who is in first place in the Mountain West, should take care of business here. But it is the other Bulldogs, not the Fresno State Bulldogs, but rather the Mississippi State Bulldogs, who I think could potentially pull off an upset here, in part because I think that they are a good team. They're a good defensive team. We've seen them play well at times this year. They've been a little inconsistent, but it's the inconsistency of the other team that they are playing that is more the storyline here. Kentucky has followed up major wins with bad performances throughout the year. They had that big win over Auburn. They lost to LSU. Now they have this huge win over Alabama. Can they go on the road and take on a good Mississippi State team? Like, this is not a pushover team. It's not Vanderbilt or Missouri. It is a good SEC team, a bubbly team, a team that could be in the NCAA tournament. This is going to be a tough test for Kentucky. How Calipari responds to what Mississippi State does defensively, whether they can be physical enough to get rebounds, whether the young players can respond well in a road environment after a big emotional win over Alabama. All of those are questions that I think we're going to get some level of an answer on Tuesday night. And it makes it one of, if not the most intriguing game that is going to go down on Tuesday in all of college basketball. We also have 4 ranked teams playing at home, and some very exciting, intriguing games in here as well. We got Cincinnati going on the road to take on the number 1 Houston Cougars. They are back at the top of the AP poll, of course, after a big win last week over Baylor and losses by UConn and Purdue. This game is at 7 Eastern time on ESPN2. FanDuel favors the Cougs by 12.5. We got Davidson at number 21 Dayton, some A10 action there. Also at 7 Eastern time on CBS Sports Network. Dayton favored by 9.5 in that one. And then we got BYU at Kansas. BYU unranked now in the AP poll. They are still ranked in the Locked On College Basketball poll. 7 is the ranking for Kansas. That game is at 8 Eastern time on ESPN+. FanDuel favors Kansas by just 6.5. And then going back to Mountain West action, San Jose State on the road at number 20 San Diego State, 11 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. FanDuel favors San Diego State by 22.5 over the Spartans of San Jose State. Yeah, a lot of intriguing games here. I'm most intrigued by BYU at Kansas. Kansas doesn't lose at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. It is a difficult place to go in and win. But Kansas has struggled this year, mostly on the road, but they've struggled at home too and barely pulled off wins. BYU is a little bit desperate right now. They fell out of the AP Top 25. I think that's probably lit a little fire for Mark Pope and that staff and that team. This is still a very good team. They're a hot three-point shooting team. They have a little bit more depth. Kansas's depth has been a big storyline, a big question throughout the season of who's going to step up. Is Kevin McCullar going to be healthy in this game? If not, if he's not playing, can Nick Timberlake or Elmarco Jackson take that step? We saw Timberlake do it last week. Can he do it again? What does that look like against a BYU team that spaces the floor, that shoots the three really well? I think there's a lot of intrigue in this game. And while I would never really bet against Kansas winning at home, I think BYU is going to make this one a game, unquestionably. I also wouldn't rule out Cincinnati, given Houston some problems. Houston being on the road or at home, I think helps them a lot, but there are not easy games in the Big 12. Cincinnati and Houston are familiar with each other, having both come over from the AAC previously. Wes Miller's a great coach. Wouldn't be shocked to see Cincinnati give Houston some issues in that one. A couple more games to get to. I'm not as concerned about Dayton over Davidson or San Diego State taking care of business against the Spartans, but we do have 4 other games that are kind of bubbly rivalry, just intriguing games taking place on Tuesday. We got Pitt at Clemson. Some more ACC action there, 7 Eastern time on the ACC network. FanDuel favors Clemson by 7.5. Pitt fighting for their lives. A win here on the road against Clemson, quad 1 win right now, although I think if Clemson loses, they fall probably out of the quad 1 conversation. A bit of a trap situation for Pitt in that one. Clemson's at home, so never mind. So if Pitt wins this one on the road at Clemson, they're going to be in great shape. They're going to get a nice quad 1 victory there. I think Clemson's probably going to take it, but again, Pitt fighting for their lives right now. They need that win to boost that resume. You also got Wisconsin at Indiana in the Big 10, 7 Eastern time for that one on Peacock. FanDuel favors Wisconsin by just 4.5 points. It has been a rough season for Mike Woodson and the Hoosiers. This would be an awesome opportunity to pick up a big win over a previously top 10 ranked Wisconsin team. Wisconsin is now out of the top 25 after stumbling in a major way the last couple of weeks in Big 10 play. Good opportunity for Indiana to pick up a win in Bloomington. Needed opportunity for Wisconsin to go pick up a decent road game and kind of get themselves back on track. In that one, going back to the Big 12, Texas at Texas Tech, 9 Eastern time for that one on ESPN. Tech favored by 3.5. 2 teams right in the middle of the pack in the Big 12. 2 teams that have a rich history against each other. 2 teams that aren't really on the bubble yet, but whoever loses is going to be sweating a little bit more. All of that makes this an incredibly exciting, intriguing, fun matchup. I think there's just a lot of elements of this game that are going to really make it a fun one to watch. And then last but not least, back to the Mountain West. We end all of these different segments talking about a Mountain West game. We got Nevada going on the road to Fort Collins to take on the Rams of Colorado State, 10:30 Eastern time on FS1. Colorado State favored by 7.5. The Rams have struggled lately in a pretty big way. Need a home win here. Nevada, if they lose this one, might be pushing themselves not out of the NCAA tournament picture, but not nearly as comfortable, or at least having to fight a lot harder to make sure they find themselves in the big dance. Fun, bubbly game going on between 2 very good programs in the Mountain West on Tuesday evening. That's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much. To those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day, reminder to join us on our Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It is free to join. There is a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. We will be back on Wednesday with another episode recapping the great action on Tuesday, getting you ready for the rest of the week as well. But until then, as always, peace out.